The Chicago Bears have created the roster flexibility to take the true best player available with their first-round pick. But what if the best player available at number 10 is a tight end?
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On the show today, I want to go through the prospect of drafting a tight end, Penn State's Tyler Warren, with the first round pick of the Chicago Bears. Not out of the question by any means, and it's a player that's going to be debated at this spot in the month here leading up to the draft, similar to the Brock Bowers conversation we had last year, and look at how that turned out. Obviously, the Bears didn't have a chance to draft Bowers, but had they, he was maybe the best tight end in all of football as a rookie, and now Tyler Warren enters that kind of conversation. So we'll look at the Bears' need for another tight end and how much Ben Johnson's going to use two tight ends this season. We'll look at how that works in the draft and whether it's worth using a first-round pick on a tight end like this. And if not, with the 10th overall pick, is there another tight end the Bears should go after? They certainly need to try and get some kind of something, but the draft class, it's specific to certain ranges in the draft is what you're going to be able to get this year. And the Bears don't have that many options when it's all said and done. But certainly you can see the appeal of a prospect like Tyler Warren. This is someone who gets compared a lot to, Jeremy Shockey or Greg Olsen as a big-bodied, athletic, do-it-all tight end, a very effective receiver who moves very well but still is almost 260 pounds, like big, strong, fast, athletic, good hands, makes plays after the catch, and is a good enough blocker. Like he's not an elite blocker by any means, but he's also not a bad blocker either. Like he's a good enough blocker, a fine blocker. You could even call him maybe even a good blocker, but not a great blocker. There's room for improvement with Tyler Warren and with any draft prospect, but like he fits the mold of these types of tight ends that go top 10 in the NFL draft. He's going to be in this conversation around where the Bears pick. He could get picked before the Bears pick. He could get picked slightly after where the Bears pick. He's definitely this caliber of player. And when you think about it, it's like, the Bears have Cole Kmet. They don't need to use a first-round pick on a tight end. But the Bears are going to use two tight ends quite a bit. And there's more room to use even more than what Ben Johnson had done in the past. If you look at the Detroit Lions offense this past season in 2024, the Lions offense used two tight ends at the third highest rate of any team in the NFL. About 32% of the Lions' offensive plays had two tight ends on the field. The only teams that used multiple tight ends more than the Lions were the Raiders and the Chiefs. Think about the Raiders as having Brock Bowers, the Chiefs as having Travis Kelce, right? Like these are teams that have great tight ends, and Sam Laporta of the Lions is up there in that conversation among the best tight ends in football. Like these offenses that have great tight ends use multiple tight end sets because they'll use that tight end as a wide receiver a lot and then bring in a regular tight end or another tight end to play the actual tight end position while having that number one tight end actually playing wide receiver. So you have two tight ends on the field, even if they're not both on the line of scrimmage like traditional tight end packages. And so you've got an opportunity here to use someone like Tyler Warren as an oversized slot receiver sometimes, as an inline tight end other times, keep Cole Kmet fresh instead of him having to play. Like he played such a high percentage of the Bears snaps last season. He was on the field a ton, and maybe you can get more out of him by being able to use him just a little bit less. And so when you have an offensive-minded head coach who wants to use multiple tight ends, who has used multiple tight ends in the past, despite the Lions not having great number 2 tight ends. Their number 2 tight end the entire time he was there was Brock Wright, who was an undrafted free agent for them out of Notre Dame in 2021, a practice squad guy who worked his way into the lineup and kind of worked his way up to being the number 2 tight end, but not a dynamic playmaker by any means. But if you made that number 2 tight end a dynamic playmaker like Tyler Warren, it can unlock so much for your offense. When you're able to put 2 tight ends on the field that both are threats as receivers and blockers, it becomes a lot harder for the defense to figure out what you're going to do on any given play. If you're in an offensive package, right, where you've got DJ Moore and Rome Odunze at wide receiver, you've got Cole Kmet and, say, Tyler Warren at tight end, and then DeAndre Swift in the backfield. Cole Kmet and Tyler Warren could be 2 more blockers in the running game. So you could have 7 blockers for the running back up on the line of scrimmage. So the defense needs to respond with enough guys in the box to be able to stop the run with those extra blockers. They want to get at least 7 guys in the box, probably 8, to have 1 more defender than there are blockers so they can tackle the running back as he comes through. If they put 8 guys in the box, that's probably going to be 4 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and a safety, most likely. Now all of a sudden, you've got them in their base defense, and if you run play action or a passing play out of that, you've got a linebacker or 2 trying to cover Cole Kmet, or a linebacker trying to cover Tyler Warren, and maybe a safety's trying to cover the other one. You get then better coverage matchups and mismatches there because of their threat as blockers. You have to respect them in the running game, so then you can get better receiver matchups, and vice versa, right? Like if you come out with them as a threat as receivers, you spread them out wide, like teams are going to match that with heavier personnel, and then it becomes easier to run the ball if you're spreading them out with the tight ends getting heavier personnel in the field, but then you kind of spread them out formationally with the heavier personnel, but a wider formation. It becomes easier to run the ball. That threat of not knowing run or pass based on the personnel, because the tight ends can do both, is a real advantage to have, as opposed to like when you have a tight end who's just really a receiver who can't block that well, then you're not as worried about stopping the run when he's in line. Or if you have a tight end who's just a blocker and can't catch that well, we don't really have to worry about having the right guys in there to cover him. So it becomes more one-dimensional for opposing defenses to stop. But dynamic players like Warren and like Cole Kmet that can do both really make a big difference in an offense. And when you think about like where that puts the Bears then in the NFL draft, you're at the point now with this roster where you've got all of your major holes filled. You'd like to add more depth on the offensive and defensive line, sure, but in the first round, you're in a position where you don't have to take an offensive lineman. You don't have to take a defensive lineman there. You can wait and address those positions later on. You don't need your first-round pick to fill some major gaping hole on your roster. You can take the truly best player available. And if you're sitting there at 10, the 10th overall pick, and say, Mason Graham from Michigan is gone, Will Campbell's gone, Ashton Genty's gone, Armand Membo is gone. Like all of the top guys you were hoping would fall to 10 aren't there. Tyler Warren's going to be in that conversation as just best player available, most talented player. Like if it's Tyler Warren versus Texas offensive tackle Kelvin Banks, or an edge rusher like Michael Williams or Mike Green or James Pierce, like you could make a pretty strong argument that Tyler Warren is a better player available than the other edge rushers and then the other offensive linemen that don't make it down to the 10th overall pick. And all of a sudden, right, if you think you can get a lot of use out of Tyler Warren, not just this year, but over the next 5 years of his rookie contract, plus ideally, right, it works out and you give him a contract extension, he sticks around for a long time, like he could be a long-term piece on your team. And let's not forget, like Cole Kmet, he is a great player, but the Bears can get out of his contract pretty much whenever they want if there's ever any kind of drop-off. And his deal runs through 2027. So you've got 3 more seasons of Cole Kmet, but it's not as though you're locked into Cole Kmet. If Tyler Warren becomes the better player, you could make a change there if you want to. You could have trade value there. There's just a lot of different things and ways an offensive mind like Ben Johnson can get creative with Tyler Warren and make that work as a fit in the offense with Cole Kmet and to have more weapons for your young quarterback. The harder part for me is whether a really good tight end, is that tight end pick worth the 10th overall pick? Is the positional value there, especially when we've seen other first-round tight ends not live up to that first-round billing? We'll take a look at why it's hard to pull the trigger on a tight end there, even if you really like Tyler Warren, next. on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, whoa, where did all my money go? Between dining out and online shopping and entertainment, it can be easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. I have the Monarch Money app on my phone, and I love it because it's a great way to see all of my financial accounts in one place. Instead of having to have, a separate app for my savings account, a separate app for my credit card, a separate app for my investments, everything, it's all in one place where I can check my finances, track my spending, and even plan long-term goals. It's a complete financial command center. And it really helps you stop just managing your money and start actually building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's MONARCH, monarchmoney.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first 12 months. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're in the thick of March Madness right now, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I know there haven't been a ton of late game madness, but if you want to ride your bracket picks all the way to the top, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. Or if college basketball is not your thing, you can bet on the NFL draft, you can bet on Major League Baseball, NHL, NBA, college football when that comes back around, tennis, soccer, boxing, you name it, they've got it all in the FanDuel app that's simple to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. The Bears have room for a tight end and for using an early pick on a tight end. Right now, your number 2 tight end is Durham Smythe, who's a cap casualty from the Miami Dolphins, who really isn't that great and is not a great number 2 tight end. I prefer him as a number 3 tight end, and I think there's a real need here for the Bears to address this position. I'm not sure that the first round is the best use of that addressing. Like, the best use of the 10th overall pick is not necessarily on a tight end, even a tight end as well regarded as Tyler Warren. And it's a similar idea to what we talked about yesterday, or on, I guess, Friday's podcast with Ashton Genty, where you can love a prospect and think he's the next great thing at his position. Tyler Warren can be the next Jeremy Shockey, the next Greg Olsen, whatever comp you want to make for him. Ashton Genty can be the next Adrian Peterson, whatever comp you want to make for him. But we know that in the NFL draft, there is no such thing as a sure thing, and some positions are easier to find good players later as opposed to having to take them in the first round in order to get a really good player at that position. With tight end in particular, you look around the NFL at the best, most productive tight ends each and every season, and there aren't many of them that are first-round picks. If you look at, like, the leaders in receiving yards this year at tight end. Of course, Brock Bowers, number 1, 13th overall pick, right? Like, that was one where it absolutely worked out. And I misspoke earlier. He was available for the Bears to draft if they wanted to, and they passed on Brock Bowers at the time. Of course, probably wasn't going to take him over Rome Odunze, but nonetheless, right? Like, Brock Bowers is obviously great and has worked out well for the Raiders. And if you knew Tyler Warren was going to be Brock Bowers, absolutely sign me up for that. But we don't know that. And we also know that all the other leading tight ends in receiving yards this year were not first-round picks. Trey McBride, 2nd-round pick. George Kittle, 5th-round pick. Jonnu Smith, 3rd-round pick. Travis Kelce, 3rd-round pick. Sam Laporta, 2nd-round pick. Tyler Kraft, 3rd-round pick. Hunter Henry, 2nd-round pick. Mark Andrews, 3rd-round pick. Like, yes, there were a couple guys that were, like, injured or whatever. Like, TJ Hawkinson was a first-round pick, and we'll talk about some of the other first-round pick tight ends that are out there. But generally speaking, you look around the NFL, you don't have to use the 10th overall pick to get the best tight ends in football. These are all guys picked anywhere from 34 in Sam Laporta to 100 in Jonnu Smith. Really is the beginning of the second all the way to the end of the third. George Kittle's more of an exception in the 5th round. You don't get a lot of 5th round tight ends being as great as George Kittle, but most of these great tight ends, 2nd and 3rd round picks: Andrews, Henry, Kraft, Laporta, Kelce, Jonnu Smith, Trey McBride. That has been more of the sweet spot for tight ends. And so if you feel like, well, it seems like it's not that it's not hard, but there's a high propensity of finding really, really good tight ends in the second and third round, then do I have to use my 10th overall pick on a tight end? Or would I be better off drafting a player that is at a position that's harder to get great play from? Offensive line, defensive line, one of these more premium positions, knowing that if I take a tight end in the second or third round, there's still a decent chance of them becoming something really good, like all these other tight ends in the second and third round that turned out to be very, very good. There's something to be said there about the positional value and still being able to find guys even if you don't take them in the first round. Because the guys that have gone in the first round have certainly not always lived up to their first round billing here. And I think when you start to look through the list of names, it's more grim than I thought it was. But before I actually went and looked, I was like, oh, yeah, let me look at all the tight ends drafted in the first round in the last decade. In my head, it was like, oh, there's been a couple of misses, but they've generally been pretty good. But when I looked at the actual list, it was worse than I remembered it being. So obviously, Brock Bowers, most recent example, has been very, very good. Also recently, Dalton Kincaid of the Bills was a first-round pick. He had a pretty good rookie season. Definitely a sophomore slump this past season. So I'm going to say jury's still out on whether Dalton Kincaid is a good first-round pick as a tight end or not. I think it's trending in the wrong direction, but we'll see. It's early in his career, and I don't want to judge Dalton Kincaid too fast. But the Falcons draft Kyle Pitts with the 4th overall pick, supposed to be a game-changing tight end, and had that really good rookie season, has 1,000 yards, and it was like, wow, Kyle Pitts is the truth here. And then he has a 350-yard season and then a couple of 600-yard seasons the last 2 years, and there's rumors that the Falcons may try and trade Kyle Pitts. He hasn't been terrible by any means, but 4th overall pick has been a disappointment there. You got TJ Hockenson right before that. I think Hockenson was a good first-round pick. Obviously, the Lions traded him, but got good value for him, and he's been worth the first-round pick, I think, that the Lions gave up for him. He's still good for the Minnesota Vikings. But you get misses like Hayden Hurst of the Ravens, who only lasts a couple seasons there. O.J. Howard of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, first-round picks that there was a bunch of love for O.J. Howard. I liked O.J. Howard in that draft class. I thought he would be a lot better than he became in the NFL. It's just really hard to predict. Or Eric Ebron to the Lions back, it's probably been more than a decade now for them, like 2013. He was a top 10 pick. I think he was 10th overall. I thought he was going to be a big-time difference-making pass catcher, and he had a good year in there, but that was about it. These guys, outside of Bowers, TJ Hockenson, and Evan Ingram, those are kind of the 3 first-round tight ends that really felt like clear successes for their team, and everybody else is somewhere between disappointing and an all-out bust. And so it can be a little bit scary to count on taking a first-round tight end when they don't hit all that well, and you see a bunch of other second and third round tight ends in a lot of these same draft classes as these tight ends that end up being better players. And so it's tough because on the one hand, you want to trust your evaluation. And if your evaluation says Tyler Warren is great, then you got to take Tyler Warren. But it is hard when it's not a position that does well in the first round, and it generally has done better in the second and third rounds where a lot of these other really good tight ends have come from. I tend to find myself still feeling like that's the preferable strategy for the Chicago Bears because I do think they need to add something at tight end in this year's NFL draft. Not to say that you're going to force a pick there, but you'd really ideally like to use at least one of these picks at tight end because of how little the Bears have behind Cole Kmet. And that second to third round range could be a little bit of a sweet spot. So if not Tyler Warren at 10, what other options do the Bears have to try and address tight end in some way, shape, or form? We'll take a look at how this draft class stacks up with where the Bears are picking next on Locked On Bears. The Bears' allotment of picks right now does generally align pretty well with where the clusters of players are projected to be available in this year's tight end draft class. It's kind of a weird tight end class where there's some really talented players, but there's not much of a middle class here. There's 2 first-round guys, 2 expected first-round guys, Tyler Warren from Penn State, Colston Loveland from Michigan. Warren's a top 15 guy. Loveland's probably a top 25 guy in that range. We'll see, where they end up going. And then there's a pause there. And then there's a handful, there's 3 or 4-ish guys that are in that second to third round range where the Bears have 3 picks, 2 second round picks and a third round pick. And then there's not much after that until you get to the late rounds. There's not a lot of guys in that late third to fourth round to early fifth round range. Like it's like first round and early day 2, and then fifth and beyond, which just so happens to align with where the Bears have draft picks, right? The Bears have one of the first picks of the third round, which is 72 overall. It's the 8th pick in the third round, 72. And then they don't pick again until 148, early in the fifth round. So the Bears go 1, 2, 2, 3, 5, 7, 7. And there just happens to not be a lot of tight ends that are projected to go in between the Bears' third round pick and the Bears' fifth round pick, which is nice, right? So you feel like there should be some tight end options available when the Bears are picking that can give them an opportunity to add at that position where there's definitely a need. Again, like I don't feel super confident in Durham Smythe as the number 2 tight end option. And right now your number 3 tight end then would be Stephen Carlson, I believe, from last season, who was a practice squad guy last year. Like I would like to add a number 2 tight end in there to make Durham Smythe your number 3 and Carlson your number 4, the way things were last year. I suppose the return of Mercedes Lewis could be a possibility there, but he'd be more like your number 3, but I don't really want Smythe to be a number 2 then, right? So like add more at tight end, but if not Brock Bowers, or excuse me, if not Tyler Warren, there's a Freudian slip for you there. There's some options in the second and third rounds here, right? I think it's only a handful though. There's Mason Taylor from LSU, son of Jason Taylor of the Miami Dolphins Hall of Fame. There's Elijah Arroyo of Miami, Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green, and then Gunnar Helm from Texas might be a little bit of a reach there. I mean, we'll see how high he ends up going. It's hard to kind of piece together exactly where these guys are going to go a month out of the draft. But like, I think any of those 3 guys would be really great number 2 tight ends with some real upside to develop into number 1 tight ends down the line. But if they don't, that's why you got Cole Kmet. Like it could be a nice fit there where these are not guys you necessarily want to draft and have to make them your starting tight end. And the Bears don't need that right now. But like Arroyo is definitely, one of this more like receiver types, not a great blocker, but I thought he was one of the more fluid moving tight ends, certainly in the Senior Bowl this past season, just in terms of like being able to get open and create separation. He looked a smidge more athletic in that regard compared to somebody like Harold Fannin Jr., who was also down there. And Harold Fannin Jr. like led college football in tight end production. He had like over 1,000 yards and over 100 catches, which is like super, super, super productive. He also, again, like not like a great blocker, but obviously a great receiver. A little bit more stiff. I'm not as high on Harold Fannin, I think, as some others are. Like he's a vertical stem guy, but you try and have him do anything kind of laterally, and it's tricky. And I feel like that limits him a little bit after the catch, but super, super productive. You can't argue against how good he has been in college there. I think then like Mason Taylor, son of Jason Taylor, is also still kind of developing into what he's going to be as a pro. He's 6'5", 255, and moves pretty well, and a good receiver for them. But I still think I want to see him get a little bit stronger and a little bit more consistent in terms of like route running, like kind of refining the tools there. And I think you can get a better Mason Taylor a couple of years from now than what you're getting right now. And I like that as a potential somebody to draft and not draft and stash, right? But draft and let him work as a number 2 tight end for a couple of years and not have to play a humongous role. I think that would make a lot of sense and be a good fit for him. And then Gunnar Helm, to me, is one of the best at working after the catch in terms of being a playmaker there. Like he's got some speed and fluidity, but not necessarily much of a blocker there either. But all these guys have size. They're 6'4", 6'5". Mason Taylor's 255. Gunnar Helm's like 250. Arroyo's 245. I think Fannin's the thinnest at like 230, more of an oversized wide receiver. But like any of those guys in the second to third round range there, maybe not with your first, second round pick, but around where the Bears are picking there, that to me would be good value. And players that would fill the Bears' need at tight end, give you a lot of upside, but not have to be that 10th overall pick on Tyler Warren. Those guys to me are kind of it for, maybe you kind of throw Terrence Ferguson from Oregon, might be in the same conversation as, again, like not a great blocker, but a good receiver. And he's going to go kind of in this third round-ish range, maybe a little after where the Bears are picking. But if you traded down or something, he'd be in that conversation. From there, like those are all the guys that are like number 2 tight ends for me in this class. Then you jump down to the Bears' 5th round pick. And these are guys that would probably be more like tight end 3 that, you hope they would compete with Durham Smythe and maybe they could beat him out, but you can't count on them for a ton. Like Mitchell Evans from Notre Dame to me is a little bit physically limited there, but he's got a high floor. Like he could be a solid special teams player and a good number 3. Like he's got some good blocking. He's got good hands. He's just not like anything special to me as an athlete. He's just big and strong, but that's kind of about it for me. Or like Jake Brenningstool from Clemson is one of these like oversized wide receiver who can make some plays after the catch, but not a ton of blocking ability, kind of an oversized slot wide receiver at this point, 6'6", 240. Like, can you make him more tenacious as a blocker and find a better role for him? Maybe. I also think Jalen Conyers from Texas Tech is a little bit of an underrated prospect later on in this draft, 5th or 6th. Well, the Bears don't have a 6th round pick anymore, so he's kind of in between the Bears' 5th and 7th round picks, but somebody, if he's there in the 7th, absolutely. Or Luke Lockey from Lockey from Iowa is also going to get a lot of looks because of the Iowa tight end pipeline. But again, like, he's got some physical limitations for me there too that I'm not declaring him the next George Kittle sleeper Iowa tight end who's going to be, super, super great. But 7th round option to come in, compete as a number 3 tight end and work their way up the depth chart someday. Like, I think any of those guys would be worth the investment and just to keep some young blood flowing in the tight end pipeline right now, because they just have so little behind Cole Kmet. I'd like to address that position in the draft and have a player that's building up into a bigger role and see if Ben Johnson can then get creative and find ways to use more dynamic weapons at tight ends. I just don't see Durham Smythe as a very dynamic player at that position. He'll catch the ball. He'll be a check down option, but I don't love him as a blocker. I don't think he's much of a playmaker after the catch. Like, it just kind of is what it is for what the Bears have at tight end. And there's really no good free agent options left. Tyler Conklin just signed for less than I thought he would. I would have probably taken him at the price that he ended up signing for in free agency. The Jets tight end. I didn't actually double check who he signed with, but he did change teams here. That you're slowly losing. You're slowly losing Tyler Conklin. Excuse me. You're slowly losing what limited tight end free agency there was left. Conklin goes on a 1-year deal to the Chargers at a price tag I absolutely would have paid for the Bears to get him as a better number 2 tight end. It's like him and Jordan Atkins of the Browns. Like, not much out there. So, like, let's see if the Bears have a plan here, or if the plan is just Durham Smythe is number 2 tight end and we'll make it work, and maybe you grab somebody at the end of training camp who's a roster cut that doesn't make another 53-man roster and bring him over here. I don't know. If number 2 tight end is the biggest hole on your roster come week 1, I think the Bears would be in a pretty good spot overall. So I'm not panicking about it, but I am interested to see how they approach this in the NFL draft. If the Bears make any moves at tight end between now and then, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you're looking for a second listen, you can always get more NFL draft talk over on the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. You can get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every single day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.